Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening, coming to you on 89.5 FM CKTZ Cortes Radio on beautiful Cortes Island in the Salish Sea. My name is Lucretia Schanfarber, and I'm host of Gabbing About Gardening. On today's show, we'll be gabbing with 4 guest gardeners, starting with Joyce McMenamon. She's a woman who makes compost bins, and not just any compost bins. Joyce makes the increasingly popular Speedy bins in Merville on Vancouver Island, and Joyce will tell us her story and give us her compost tips. Then we'll gab with Alana Chomica. He's a phenomenal gardener who lives and gardens in Nanu's Bay. Alan is getting a lot of attention on our Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page after posting pictures and comments about an amazing, get this, ancient watermelon that he grows on Vancouver Island. What's so amazing about it? Well, the most obvious thing is it has a handle. Yes, you heard me right. It has a handle. And Alan will tell us all about that. And then we'll call Jim Abram on Quadra Island. Jim is not only a longtime gardener, he's also the longtime regional director for Area C of the Strathcona Regional District. And Jim is doing his best to change the rules of a wood chipping grant from the Union of BC Municipalities so that we gardeners, we can keep that resource for our gardens. And Jim's going to update us on how that's going and what we can do to help make that happen. And we'll wrap up today's show with a fellow who is near and dear to my heart. My own son, Justice Schanfarber, will gab about his food forest garden in Campbell River. What is a food forest garden and why is it a great way to grow a garden? Stay tuned. We're going to hear all about it on today's show. Our first guest, coming right up on Gabbing About Gardening, is a lady I met last fall. I had just scored a weekly load of organic veggie scraps from a health food store, and I needed a compost bin that could hold a lot of biomass and that was rat-proof and raccoon-proof and that made compost quickly. And I found just the right one, thanks to Joyce McMenamon and her Speedy bins. Hello, Joyce, and welcome to Gabbing About Gardening.
Hi, Lou. Great to be here.
Oh, it's nice to hear your voice. It's been a while since our get-together at your place.
It has, yeah.
So let's start.
It's been quite a year.
It has been a year, but we won't go there. It's also been a great gardening year, and my compost is more terrific than ever. I'd love to start with you telling us about the history of Speedy Bin. It started with your father, did it?
That's right. It started in 1989, if you can believe it, 32 years ago now. And my dad had, as kids, we always had a compost pile growing up in Victoria. And, of course, it was always the kids who had to take the pile of scraps out. And we all hated it because it was just full of rats. It was these wooden structures that my dad had built, no covers, just slats, and it was just a rat haven. And so we all hated it, as you can imagine. And so my dad, he's a bit of an idealist, always thinking of a better way. And he realized that there's a need for a compost bin that would keep out rats. And so he worked with a sheet metal guy in Victoria, and they designed these bins and changed, tweaked them quite a bit and came up with a reasonable design. But they were expensive, of course, and so they made quite a few, maybe 1,000, but then there wasn't really a business case to be made for it because the plastic ones were coming on the market at about a quarter the price. If his metal bins were $120, they were like $30 or $40 for a plastic one. So he stopped making them. And then yeah, years went by and we moved up to Merville on the island. And then City Farmer in Vancouver found us again and asked if we would make the Speedy Bins again because of the rat problem in Vancouver.
So they got resurrected a little bit. And
yeah.
You know, when I visited your place there in Merville, I was really impressed with the variety of models and designs that you had. And you also showed me your own compost that was just beautiful. Tell me about the designs that you have and how they differ and how you recommend what kind to people, like help them select.
We have 3 models now. They've gone through a lot of evolutions. And so we have what we call the Speedy Bin Classic, which is an all-metal bin, and they all have the same principles. They sit on the ground, and there's a metal screen underneath so that the water and microbes and worms can transfer right into the earth, which I think is a better design. And a big front door that lifts up when you want to remove your compost, and a big lid so it's easy to turn your compost and add scraps when you want. So all the bins have those features to make it easy to use, and then metal to keep them out. And we found over the years that some people found the lid a bit big and awkward, and a lot of our customers are well retired. And so now we've got a model, we call it the deluxe model, which is the exact same except it has a hinged lid, and it's a bit easier to use.
Well, I have, I think it's the Scholar and the Deluxe. Are those the 2 I got from you?
Yeah, that's right. And then we found that we've got a lot of them in school gardens, which is absolutely wonderful. It just melts my heart to see kids learning how to grow food in schools. But we found that the kids are a bit rough. They jump on them and bend the metal, and now the lids don't fit right. And so we realized that we needed one that was a lot tougher. And so now we've built one that we call the Scholar, and made right here in Cumberland. And they have cedar corners and cedar frames, so you can jump on them and it's not a problem.
Yeah, I really love
And then they
mine.
have corrugated metal for the sides.
Yes, and they're very strong and they look great. I actually really like the look of it. I've created a bit of a factory, because I'm picking up 4 or 5 big banana boxes of fresh, well, I shouldn't say fresh, but produce scraps from the health food store and from the restaurant that they have. Some of it's pretty funky. Some of it's very, very, much fresher. But the thing is, it's a lot at one time.
Right.
And so, I'm layering it. I put in the veggie scraps, then I layer it with a layer of nice dry, usually maple and alder leaves. And when I was visiting you were really keen about throwing in a shovelful of soil too, right?
Yeah, I find that it will have, it just adds to the mix. It has all your decomposing microbes and probably worm cocoons in it as well. And also the worms need the sand for grit for their digestion, right? So you want to have a little bit of soil in there. So I think it helps.
Well, just walk us through it a bit. So we get a Speedy Bin, we set it up. Why don't you go through the steps with us on how to actually start a new compost pile in one of the Speedy Bins?
Yeah. So what we recommend is to start off with something fluffy on the bottom, like leaves or straw or corn husks or little twigs or something that you've got lying around, shredded paper maybe. That's something airy on the bottom. It just helps with the breathing of it because it breathes through the bottom as well, right? Mm-hmm. And also it needs to be on ground that will have drainage. You don't want it to form puddles underneath. Otherwise, it doesn't breathe from the bottom and it could go anaerobic.
And level. It needs to be level.
It should be level. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. So that the lid fits nice and square. Yeah, and then so if you can, put something fluffy in the bottom, and then start to put in your kitchen scraps or yard waste, your high nitrogen stuff, whatever you've got around, and then mix it with your high carbon stuff. So leaves, like you say, they're my favorite because they've got minerals, nutritive minerals in them, and also they're ready to break down anyway. That's the stage that they're at. So leaves are my favorite, or straw, shredded paper, something high in carbon to mix it with. And and then from time to time, maybe a little trowel full of just soil out of your garden. Mm-hmm. And then keep it damp. That's critical. Worms breathe through their skin, and all the microbes in there, they all move around on the water meniscus around the sand grains, right? And so it needs to be kept damp.
I love the way you know your stuff, Joyce. I can always refer to you. Now, recently on our Gabbing Facebook page, I noticed that you said you don't necessarily turn your compost in your Speedy bin. Why is that?
Because I'm a lazy composter.
Okay.
I let the worms do that work. You can turn it. That's fine. But, it's kind of like your garden. It makes layers in there, right? And so if you turn it, then it upsets everything. That's one, any kind of composting is good composting. That's how I see it. However, one of the problems with tumblers is that when you turn them, they will form little balls, right? You get these little round balls. They don't break down quite as effectively. Whereas if it's just in connected to the ground, then all the worms and the bugs, they'll go to the strata that they're happy in, right?
Well, it just seems that there are as many ways to compost as there are gardeners. Everybody just seems to work with what they have. And the beautiful thing about compost is eventually it decomposes no matter what you do. The great thing is to not have to deal with the rats and the raccoons if you don't want to, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, all composting is good. On our website, we have an article, 13 ways to compost, and it goes through kind of the hierarchy or different ways of composting. And like you say, everything will break down at one point, so yeah, it's all better than trucking it off to the landfill.
Oh, that's for sure. And I really am very satisfied with how quickly things are breaking down in my Speedy bin. How long do you find it does generally take once the bin is full?
In the first year, it takes quite a bit longer because you're growing all those microbes and the worms are reproducing. So the first batch can take months, maybe even a year. But after that, it goes fast. Like I've noticed with ours, if I take scraps out after a week, you can hardly tell what was in there the week before. Like it goes very quickly. So within
you're
weeks
opening
rather
up
than months.
That sounds great. And you're opening up the bottom and taking out what you want, or are you completely emptying out every once in a while?
What I do, there's just two of us, and I will add to one side and take out of the other side. So at the moment, I'm adding to the right-hand side of my bin and taking out good usable compost out of the left-hand side. So no dividers, just let the worms and bugs go where they want. And then and that way I can get away with having just one bin. And so I've always got a place to add fresh scraps from the kitchen, and always have usable compost. And then you're right. About once a year, I will move the whole bin, empty it all out, move it to a different bed, because I put my compost right in a raised bed, because the soil underneath is going to be your best, right? That's where all your leachate is coming out into. And so I'll move it to a new raised bed, and then put back the bits that aren't fully composted yet. And so now it's like sourdough. You've got a great starter bed.
It is like sourdough. Well, thank you for those amazing tips, Joyce. And we can learn more at speedybin.com. Is that right?
That's right.
Well,
yep.
I'm just grateful for your bins, and thank you for those tips. People are going to check you out and get more of your tips, and we'll talk about compost again soon, Joyce.
That sounds great, Lou. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for being on Gabbing About Gardening. We've been talking to Joyce McMenamon from Merville. Joyce and her family have been making the Speedy Bin composters for well over 30 years. Coming up next, Alana Chomica. We'll be gabbing with Alan from Nanoose Bay on Vancouver Island. And this is Cortes Radio, 89.5 CKTZ. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Cortes Radio is now hiring a production assistant. If you're between the ages of 18 to 30, post regularly on social media, you've dabbled in mixing audio, make playlists in your spare time, then you should consider applying for our Canada Summer Job position, Production Assistant. Deadline to apply, Friday, May 7th. Visit cortesradio.ca for full description and how to apply.
Welcome back to Gabbing About Gardening. Our next guest is Alana Chomica from Nanoose Bay on Vancouver Island. Alan grows and propagates and sells many unique plants. He's an enchanting gardener, and his gardens are enchanting. We see pictures of them on Facebook with plant pictures and stories, and recently he posted the picture of an ancient watermelon that he grew with beautiful red seeds and a handle. Yes, a handle. Alan is with us by phone to tell us about that watermelon and to give us more melon growing tips. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening, Alan.
Oh, thanks.
We're all anxious to hear the story of this watermelon.
Well, you can check it out online, and Baker Creek Seeds actually sells the seeds now. But years ago, I was trying to grow watermelons here, and it's very hard to grow them because we have cool nights, and watermelons like a long season and lots of heat. So I decided to try and educate myself, and I went online and looked up watermelon farms. And I found a farm down in Nevada called the Bundy Watermelon Farm, found their phone number, and I gave them a call. Well, it just so happened I talked to the owner's wife, who knew all about watermelons, and we started talking about the different melons we have, and we were both excited about what we had, so we did an exchange. And she sent me some of her favorite seeds, including the ancient handled watermelon, which we grew.
And it really does have a handle. I mean, the pictures that you're posting on the Gabbing Facebook page are just fabulous.
Well, you know, it's kind of funny because it puts things into a different perspective. If you think of a handle being bred into a watermelon, that would indicate that these seeds that could have been 1,000 or even older years old, that handle was bred into the plant by a horticulturist that long ago. You know, it just stuff like that is just it's incredible to think of it.
Well, and it really puts a whole different perspective on things, doesn't it? Dr. Nancy Turner, the ethnobotanist, talks a lot about the way that Indigenous peoples really did select and breed and garden in this way. And what you're talking about really points to that too, doesn't it?
And, you know, a lot of it still goes on, too. One of the things that I look for in my gardening world are plants of worth. And, in fact, my little business is called Plants of Worth. So I seek out plants that have an incredible value. And I'm looking at some potatoes right now, and some of you may be aware of the potato called the hide-up potato. So this is a potato from the 1600s that is still growing in the Haida Gwaii. By the indigenous peoples there. And in fact, that's where I got my seed potatoes from. And the idea being that the seagoing vessels in the 1600s and 1500s used to drop off potatoes and other things for the indigenous people to grow, so that when they would be sailing up and down the coast, they could stop in at, call them a port or a village or whatever. They would get fresh water. They probably picked up smoked salmon and that sort of thing. And they would also pick up the potatoes that they dropped off for these people. And the unique thing about the Haida potato is that I grow 4 different styles of potatoes, right? And when we make our first potato salad of the year, I end up mixing all the different potatoes together. There's some nice purple ones, Danish heirloom ones, that sort of thing. But when I get to the Haida potato and try to cut them, it's like the knife has to be pressed really hard. And the potatoes themselves are far more dense than any of the other potatoes. So they would have a very high nutritional attribute to them, and they're just a really good potato.
And do they store better than some of the potatoes we're more familiar with, like the russets or the Idaho Reds?
Well, it's hard to say because I eat them all.
Potatoes are really, really popular again. You know, the lovely thing about potatoes, and Jennifer Bankstall talked about it last week when she was on the show, is that they're nice and big and easy to plant, and kids love to plant them and harvest them. So I'm delighted you brought up potatoes. I'm a big potato fan. But let's talk melons for a minute, okay, Alan, because they are not that easy to grow. At least I have never found them easy to grow. What are your special tips for growing watermelons and for other melons like cantaloupes?
Well, let me just talk about the food source first. So 2 years ago, I took a big grain sack and I filled it full of the richest compost I could find. And I planted one of my winter keeper watermelons in it. And just a word on the winter keeper. This is also called the red-seeded Navajo. And it keeps fresh until Christmas time, if you can believe that. It's an incredible beast. But I planted it in this sack, and it grew well, and it started growing melons. And then by about the middle of August, it just stalled. And I believe essentially what happened was it used up all the available food. It just takes so much food. So it's hard to grow a melon in a container. It's almost like you have to have a huge mound to grow it in. The other thing is heat. I now plant all of my melons in a huge heap of compost with LED rope lights buried about 3 or 4 inches below the soil level. And I measure the temperature, and I find I get about a 10-degree temperature range difference between the top of the soil and the soil itself. So I'm providing my melons with heat. And the other thing is, if you recall last year, we had a really cool, wet year, and it was hard to grow a lot of heat lovers. None of my melons produced anything last year except for one ancient watermelon that I grew inside my greenhouse. So it had the added benefit of having the heat from the greenhouse, all the solar energy. It had the benefit of mounds of compost that it was able to consume and turn into melons. And it had the bottom heat as well. So that's what I'm trying to replicate this year. I've bought a new greenhouse that's dubbed the Melon Cave, and I'm just going to grow special melons in there.
I love it, the Melon Cave. So melons are super heavy feeders, lots of compost, lots of heat. You're actually burying lights in the soil.
Yeah.
And the Melon Cave, what is a melon cave? It's
just a 10 by 8 greenhouse from Buckerfields that costs about $450. And I took out a plum tree last year that made a lot of shade, and I've come to realize that it's the sunniest place in my entire yard. So that's where I've put this new greenhouse, and I've dubbed it the Melon Cave.
And what are you going to grow in there this year? What kind of melons?
Well, I've got to keep the melons separate. As you're probably well aware, all the cucurbits can cross-pollinate, and you'll end up with something that maybe isn't really what you're looking for. So I have 5 different locations where I will grow each of my 5 separate melons.
Well, now, I have a question for you, Alan, and maybe you can Answer it. It's a burning question. I thought I had an answer, but everybody seems to have a different opinion. Here's the question. When you grow different varieties of plants in the cucurbit family, melons, squashes, my understanding was they will not cross-pollinate the year they are growing. The only cross-pollination takes place through the seeds. So if you save seed from that crop and you try to grow out seed, it will not grow true because they've cross-pollinated, but they don't cross-pollinate while they're growing. What do you have to say about that? Are you going to have a final answer here for us?
Well, I don't know about that, but when I see a bee going from a cucumber into a squash, different things happen. For example, I grow a squash called a Kakai Pumpkin, and they're those little pepitas, if you know what I mean. You can buy them in the bulk food section. They're a pumpkin seed without a shell on it, right? Mm-hmm. So I had a whole pile of those growing one year, and I had gem squash, seeds that I had brought back from Africa, and the Kakais were about 50% something completely different. They didn't produce any of the seeds that I was looking for. So I could only assume that it was the bees that caused that malfunction of the plant to produce the fruit that it was supposed to. And so I don't know if that's true or not, but I have a brush that sits by the door, and whenever I go outside and I see my cucumbers or my pumpkins flowering, I identify the female flowers, and I will stick the brush in the male flower first and then into the female flower.
Wow.
So
You are dedicated. Well, I'm going to go on a research project after the show today, and I'm going to really see what I can find out. We'll stay in touch about this issue, and I'd really like to be in touch again to hear more about what's going on in your garden and get more gardening tips from you, Alan. We've learned so much from you on Facebook. Will you join us again another time?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining Gabbing About Gardening. We've been talking to Alana Chomica from his beautiful garden at Nanoose Bay in British Columbia on Vancouver Island. And Alan will join us again. He's quite expert in growing melons. Coming up next is Jim Abram. And Jim is going to join us from Quadra Island. But first, a little station ID here. Just to remind you, you are listening to Gabbing About Gardening. We come to you every Tuesday at 11:30 on Cortes Radio, 89.5 FM.
Get your toes tapping and body moving with Matt King Kono's Lunchtime Locomotion. Thursdays 11 to 1, grooves exploring round-the-world upbeat pop, rock, jazz, fusion, and world beat, nostalgia and adventure, spirits lift with the Lunchtime Locomotion, Thursdays 11 to 1, here on CKTZ 89.5 FM.
Welcome back. You're tuned in to Gabbing About Gardening. I'm Lucretia. If you live on Quadra Island, you're going to know Jim Abram. Everybody knows Jim. He's the longtime regional director for the island, and he joins us to gab about, well, saving our wood chips and keeping them on Quadra and Cortes Island. Hi, Jim. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening.
Good afternoon, Lucretia. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're crazy busy. And you have led many a fight for Quadra Islanders, Jim, on all kinds of fronts. But did you ever think you'd be leading the charge to save our island's wood chips?
Well, you know, everything else has had to be fought for. We have to fight for everything on both islands, your island the island, Cortes Island that you're on, and this island that we're on, and all the other outer islands. Right now I'm just looking at like 6 things this morning that I have to fight tooth and nail for. Why? You know, we're supposedly the local government for the area. you would think that with the community support for different issues, we should be able to just move through them and get on with business, but it doesn't work that way.
Oh, I hear you, brother. Power to the people. I feel your pain.
Oh.
Tell us the backstory, though, on this wood chips issue. I find it so interesting. I read one of your recent regional director's reports, which I love reading, by the way, and I just find it so intriguing. Can you give us the lowdown?
Well, I mean, this came forward originally. I wasn't totally involved in it in the very beginning, but, of course, as you recall, you were one of the leaders of trying to get some fire protection of some sort up in the North Island, because we have a divided island fire district, and the other one is not part of the regional district. And then the other rest of it is taken care of by the provincial government, supposedly. And then the provincial government started coming up with all of these little programs to do things like called fireproofing or whatever that term is that they use, where they are trying to get people to, clear everything around their houses so that there won't be structure fires. Well, that's great, fine and dandy, but then people start doing it. And, it just turns out that you can't clear a whole forest full of garbage. I mean, garbage in the way of branches, needles, etc. You can't clear it without trying to do something with it. And so somebody came up with, let's do this great wood chipping program. We will come to people's properties and we will chip everything that people bring to a central, spot or whatever on their property, and we will chip it all up, and we'll deal with it that way, and that way you won't have all these branches laying around. What they didn't tell us at the time was, and one of the provisions of that wonderful program is that we're going to insist that you, not ask, but insist that you give us those chips in a huge container, like a dump truck type container, so that they can be transported off of the islands and taken to a disposal site, which is either in Campbell River or in Comox, depends on who you talk to on which day, and it's going to be used in their supposed composting type facility or whatever, or it's just going to be used in the landfill. Mm-hmm. Well, lo and behold, you and I, we pay huge dollars every year, if you look on your tax bill, for the Comox or the Comox Valley Regional District waste management facility in both cities, both Campbell River and in the Comox Valley, to dig these gigantic holes, which have to be lined, they have to collect methane, they have to have runoff, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to dump things inside of it to fill it up that we have taken out of the forest and chipped up. Yeah, it does seem really off base, doesn't it? So this was a grant. This is insanity as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, And so, Jim, just to back up a sec, it's a grant from the United BC. From the BC municipalities. It's a part of the Fire Smart program. I mean, on the surface, it looks like it's doing us a service by helping us to remove debris that is possibly a fire hazard. But once they're chipped, you're saying everything is trucked off. It must be pretty expensive to do that. Trucked off island, put either in an organic landfill or composted or something. And then for those of us who use wood chips, we would ultimately almost have to buy our wood chips back. That's exactly right. That's pretty wild. And people would have to, like here on Quadra, there's a young fellow that has a landscaping business, and it bring wood chips over here, to sell them to people. So, this makes no sense to me whatsoever logically as a person or as a regional director. and I'm sure it makes no sense to your regional director either.
Well, or as a gardener, because I know you are a longtime gardener as
absolutely.
Well. It really hurts when you see that resource leaving the island.
We've got a humongous garden back here, and I get my wood chips from a local sawmill. I go and haul them in Rubbermaid gas cans in my pickup truck. I can get 9 in there at a time, and bring them home, both for the paths and for the use in the soil, conditioning soil, and around in and around plants. So, and in my composting. So, here's a commodity that we have right at our back door, and we're having somebody come over, chip it up, take it away, and charge us for it, basically through taxation, to deal with it some other way. And then they double tax us by having to make the landfill bigger to accept it all. So, we just had this come before a board meeting. Let's see, it was on March 5th. We had some options come forward because we had all been complaining about the fact that we're having to take these wood chips away. And staff came up with 2 options, and one of them, the second option, is the one that we adopted. Almost not adopted, but we adopted it. And it basically consisted of a request, I'll just read it real quick, that the current UBCM wood chipping policy be amended to allow local disposal of wood chips in a manner that was more efficient and less costly than transporting to an approved facility. This alternative presumed that there may be circumstances where a degree of oversight by UBCM is still required with respect to the manner in which wood chipping debris is managed. That was put in there, that last line, just to make the BC Wildfire Service happy, so that they know, hey, somebody's looking after this. They're making sure that it isn't just left in gigantic piles and it's going to, self-combust at some point. It's being used. Yes. It's being spread on the ground, or it's being used in a garden, or it's, whatever.
Absolutely. It will be managed properly. And in fact, more and more research is showing that using wood chips properly in the garden and around as a landscaping tool actually is a part of a Fire Smart program, that it can suppress fire around your area. Thanks so much for doing that, Jim. First of all, I think people are really appreciating that. What do you think is going to happen? Okay, go ahead.
There's just one little thing that I wanted to add to it. The second part of that was that after the 2 options, there was another sort of add-on addendum to that resolution that said, failing those things, we would like to request with the UBCM and BC Wildfire and blah, 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 all these different agencies to have a conference call and explain why this is so stupid to do what they're doing. And I'm sorry for being so blunt, but,
Well, I've never known you to be any other way, Jim.
And anyway, I did not see that in my board agenda right now. I'm looking at it on my screen. It's not in our board agenda that we're going to continue with the conference call one, and the reason that it's on my agenda is because this is notice coming back from UBCM and from the Fire Smart people telling us, no, we are going to ship it off island. It's got to be removed. So they have denied our request. So now I just called Sean Koopman, who you are probably well aware of and have worked with a lot over the years. And he's a great guy for, staying on top of this stuff. And I called Sean and said, Sean, you got to go back through our recorded minutes and find that, because that was part of the motion, that we would have a conference call with UBCM and all other parties to explain to them why this needs to be done this way.
Well, I want you to know, Jim,
Sean is going to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want you to know that I know that our island communities of Cortes Island and Quadra Island, especially the gardeners, are rallying behind you. And you just tell us what we need to do to help you move this initiative forward. We know the chipping program is going to come on the islands, both islands, sometime in May. And it's not enough time to change the minds of the bureaucrats yet. But it sounds like you've put that in motion. What can we do to help you?
Well, I guess, letters to the regional district, fill Sean up with a pile that he can wave at the meeting and say, we've got this many people that are saying that what you guys are doing defies logic. And we would really like you to change your mind and make use of what you're calling a waste product. It's not a waste product. It's a valuable product.
Oh, they're like gold. Commodity. It's like gold here.
So, it blows me away that we have to fight for kinds of things like this all the time. At the same time, this is the same province that will not hire large aerial bombers to put out huge wildfires every year, like the Mars water bombers. They won't put out a contract to take care of these wildfires in their infancy before they become humongous. If they're worried about wildfire, well, let's start talking about all those kinds of things, and let's start locally with wood chips.
Yep, I agree with you, Jim. You're preaching to the converted here. I know it's a very expensive grant, and I think we do need more public input. So you're suggesting people write letters and contact Sean Koopman at Regional District and just say, we want to save our wood chips. We want to use them in our garden and give them to the islands to manage as their own resource. Hey, just on a completely other note, Jim, what's happening in your garden these days?
What's happening in my garden?
Yeah. What's growing well?
I got garlic. It's about a foot and a half tall. Healthy as ever. Potatoes are all planted. Blueberries are blossoming. Transplanting some raspberry plants maybe today or tomorrow. Nice. This is mainly being done by Wendy because, as you know, I broke my back last year and I can't really do a heck of a lot. I can do a little bit.
I know. But, I hope you're healing.
Rhubarb is at about, each stem is at about 2 feet long. So
wow,
everything's coming along just as it should. And,
beautiful.
I'm
I like
hoping
that.
To be able to get out there, rebuild all my garden beds this year. They're all raised beds.
Well,
Greenhouse, I've transplanted all of my our chard that were like 3-inch tall plants that were not going to make it through the winter. I transplanted probably about 30 or 40 plants into our greenhouse. We have the most beautiful rainbow chard. That's probably
You're making me hungry.
Tall.
You're making me hungry. It's almost lunchtime.
It's unbelievable to walk out there.
It really is.
We did the same with arugula. I thought, I'll just try it. What the heck? And put in 2 rows of arugula and one each at each end of the garden. It's providing so much food we can't use it.
And I'll bet the bees are loving whatever flowers are happening. Hey, Jim, thank you so much for this. You've really been standing up for the islands, and thank you for standing up for gardeners now who want to save their wood chips, use their wood chips. We'll keep following this issue with you. Thanks so much for joining us on Gabbing About Gardening today.
Thank you very much for having me, Lou. I'm sorry I probably went over time, but
no, we had a good time. We got lots of info. We're right on schedule. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon. Coming up next, have you ever strolled through a food forest garden, picking berries, watching birds, sitting in the shade of a tree? Well, I have. It's the garden that my son, Justice, has created in Campbell River, and he's going to be our next guest coming up in just a few moments. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
8 gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no trouble turn me round, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no trouble turn me round. Gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no sorrow turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no sorrow turn me round. Gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no hatred turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no hatred turn me round. Gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, keep on believing, keep on receiving, gonna build a brand new world.
Hello and welcome back to Gabbing About Gardening. I'm your host, Lucretia Schanfarber. Well, one of my best garden teachers is going to join us next. He's actually my son, Justice Schanfarber. Justice has created in Campbell River a beautiful food forest garden, and he's here to tell us about food forest gardening and why it might be a great idea for you to incorporate at least some of the principles in your own garden. Hi, Justice, and welcome to Gabbing About Gardening.
Hi, Mom. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being with us. Let's start by you telling us what a food forest garden is and how it's different from, say, the classic, Mr. McGregor style veggie garden concept.
Well, a food forest garden mimics the ecology and character and succession of a forest by incorporating mostly perennials with various vertical layers. So there's a mixed canopy rather than the single layer that you find in Mr. McGregor's vegetable garden. You have upper canopy of fruit and nut trees, a lower canopy of shrubs, woody and herbaceous shrubs, herbs, and ground covers.
And so much of it is edible. It's like you can walk through and just graze as you go.
In my food forest garden, yes, absolutely. I mean, we incorporate plants that aren't necessarily edible. They have their own functions. But I'd say in our food forest garden, probably 90% of the plants are edible.
Now, you started with a bare lot. How long ago was it?
6 years.
6 years ago. And yesterday, you were our garden teacher on the Gabbing About Gardening Zoom gathering for gardeners around Canada, and you showed some remarkable pictures as well as took us on a tour of your garden. Now, in 6 years, how did it start, and where are you at with your garden now after 6 years?
Well, it started with truckloads of wood chips to smother out the scruffy grass. It was just a poor quality lawn is pretty much what we were dealing with here. Our place is on a third of an acre, just outside of downtown Campbell River. So this is really accessible. Really, this is an urban food forest garden. I mean, it's the kind of design that anybody could do in a city or town yard or lot, backyard. Ours is in our backyard, although it's extended out to the front yard. And where is it at now? Well, it's a beautiful space with paths and shadier areas and sunnier areas. It's quite a diverse space that we enjoy being in. It requires, it's the sort of space that we really get to choose how much energy we want to put into it and how much effort. So once the bones of it are in, and you manage to get the grass out and the worst of the perennial weeds that we all deal with in this climate. If we stopped doing anything in the garden, it would continue to produce for many years and probably decades. So we can make interventions at whatever sort of pace we want. We can work intensively in it if we want to, if there's certain outcomes that we want to achieve, or if our energy is directed elsewhere. We do lots of stuff in our life. We can just kind of let it be and still have something that we love and that feeds us and is beautiful and interesting.
Well, that sounds like it would suit a whole lot of gardeners who don't necessarily want to be tied to the garden day in and day out, and they have some other things in their lives going on. So tell us about the plants you are growing. You've got a lot of food plants. You preserve a lot of food in the way of jams and jellies, or your partner Sue does. Tell us about the berries that you're growing.
Well, the emphasis in the food garden is on perennials. So, as you know, most of the vegetable crops that we all enjoy are annuals. And annuals play a pretty minor role in the food forest garden. More so at the beginning when there's more sun and before the canopy fills in, there's more space for annuals. So part of the food forest garden succession is a move over time from annuals into perennials. Mm-hmm. So the plants that have been established here 6 years in include all of the tree fruits that we're familiar with, plus a few oddball ones that we like to experiment with. Some hazelnuts, the berries. Oh gosh, all the usuals. I mean, all the usual berries, from blueberries to strawberries to raspberries. Some more unusual ones like the gummy berries or Elaeagnus.
So you've got apples, cherries, figs, and your garden self-seeds. A lot of your veggies, like your lettuces and some of your brassicas, I noticed when I'm in your garden that they're just popping up on their own most of the time.
We do very little seeding and almost no transplanting, and that's just our style. And it limits our palate, but we're okay with that.
And your front boulevard is covered in raspberries, and you let the neighbors come in to pick and eat. Tell us quickly about that before we have to say bye-bye.
Well, we decided to cover the boulevard in raspberries. First, we covered it in wood chips to kill the grass, and we planted the raspberry canes, all of which we got from you, straight into the wood chips, and they responded very well to that. So we have really a raspberry forest at the front of the house, which in the summer kind of gives us a nice bit of privacy, a bit of screen from the road, and people intuitively sense that they're welcome to pick because it comes right up to the road. We don't have any signs out or anything, and then the neighbors who we have interactions with are explicitly invited, and that includes over the years. Neighborhood kids. The kids really get a joy. It's magical to be able to just wander over and cram your face full of raspberries.
You're speaking as one who knows, I think, right?
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
Oh, thank you so much for this, Justice. You've created a beautiful visual picture. If only more people were planting urban food forest gardens, we could just graze our way through the city. Thank you for being with us. We'll talk again.
Thanks for having me.
That's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. And thank you to our sponsors, Speedy Bin, Compost Bins, Campbell River Garden Club, Quadra Island Garden Club, and, of course, Cortes Island Garden Club. Remember to join us on Facebook. There's always lots of great info for you there. And check out our weekly Zoom gathering for gardeners every Monday at 3:30. Next Monday, our guest garden teacher on Zoom is Jane Squire from Salt Spring Island. Jane is a greenhouse gardener who grows citrus and avocados all year round. She'll tell us how she does it and how maybe we can do it. And join us here next Tuesday. Right here on Gabbing About Gardening, same time, same place, 89.5 FM, CKTZ Cortes Radio. We'll keep gabbing. Big thank you to you, Brian McKinnon, our show producer. I'm Lucretia Schanfarber. Thanks for tuning in. Now go outside and get dirty.